Yes, it's bang on 1 o'clock, and welcome to this, our live lunchtime webinar in January. I'm Jackie Pickles. I'm the current president of LD London. And for those of you who don't know us and what we stand for, we are the London chapter of LEDI, Les Dames d'Escoffier International. It's a philanthropic, I can never say that word, organisation founded over 40 years ago for women working in the culinary fields. And we raise money for charity, we support each other, and we mentor those new to our professions, stretching from restaurants to journalism, manufacture to marketing, chocolate, cheese, winemaking. There are over 2,500 members worldwide, mainly in the US, and we are currently a group of about 35 in London. Always looking for new members, so please do look us up and get in touch for further information if this interests you. You'll find all that information at ldei.org or lesdameslondon.org. So today it really is my pleasure to lead you into what promises to be a fabulously interesting discussion between three wonderful women, well, four wonderful women actually, but three women changing people's lives through teaching them how to cook. Many thanks to Lucy of Food Behind Bars, Rachel of the Luminary Bakery, and Kathy of Kitchen Confidence. And who better to share their stories than the wonderful Sheila Dillon. Thank you very much, Sheila, for being our interviewer again today. And thank you also to our secretary, Sue Carter, who is behind the scenes, making all of this happen, as she always does, and whose idea it was to gather this great panel today. So our panel will be happy to answer your questions in about 45 minutes. So please do pop those into the chat box, and I'll pass over as many of those at that time. All right, so we best get started. Over to you, Sheila, please.
Well, welcome to this what can I say? Another Zoom meeting. I wish we were all together in one big room, but we're with, as Jackie said, three remarkable women. And the title, Kitchen Confidence, Reinvention Through Cooking and Changing Lives, which is a big claim, really. And so we want to find out if you really can change lives through food. I already believe you can, but these are three women who have experience in very different settings doing that. And as Jackie said, we have Rachel Stonehouse, Lucy Vincent, and Catherine Sloman. And what I thought I'd do is begin by asking each of them, so they have 4 or 5 minutes, to tell us about what they do and what they think about the premise of why we're all meeting today. And then we'll move on, we'll talk a bit more and then move on to your questions. I imagine you have quite a lot. So let's begin, Rachel, with you. Luminary Bakery, remarkable, training women who've suffered horrible violence, often in home from men, really have had a tough, they've drawn one of life's tough cards, and you're training them to be professional bakers. Can you tell us really a bit more about Luminary, why you got involved, what it does, and why you think food and cooking can transform lives?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you say, I work for Luminary Bakery, and I'm their head bakery trainer, which means I get the privilege of teaching all the women that come through our courses how to bake. Most of them have never baked before. Most of them have no idea what a tablespoon or a teaspoon is, or how to use an electric scale. So it is really kind of starting from scratch and building up from there. As you said, Luminary is a social enterprise bakery, and we're based in London. We've got a couple of sites, and we were created to fulfil a need that our founder saw for employment and training opportunities for women who had experienced extreme disadvantage. That could be gender-based violence, as you say, domestic violence, sexual exploitation. That could be homelessness. They might have experienced the criminal justice system, or recently left care. So lots of different things. But she kind of acknowledged that actually these women were facing a lot of what we call multiple disadvantages, so lots of different contributing factors. And she was working with women that were kind of living in hostels in East London. Some of them were selling sex on the streets of East London. And she identified that actually these barriers and these multiple disadvantages put them furthest from the job market. And so they were really struggling to find alternative employment or kind of employment. And yet having employment and being financially independent was really, really crucial to changing their situations. I think she also recognised that, like, when we experience trauma or violence, so often it can isolate us from community, when actually in those times community is really what we need most. So she sort of brought these two things together, and at Luminary we seek, our kind of aim, I guess, is to provide a really safe place for women to learn, to heal, to grow together in community, and we use baking as a tool to take them through that. So we kind of tackle these issues, but using baking to kind of take them on a journey into what we say independence and employment. So it's about helping them to find work, but also becoming more independent in themselves. And I think we seek to reduce marginalisation and unemployment for disadvantaged women in London by mainly giving them opportunities for training and for jobs, to help them to develop those skills that they need to really thrive in work. As I said, we're a social enterprise, so we're both a business and a charity. And on the business side of things, we have cafe bakeries in London, and we're really, really passionate about using baking for social change. Business and baking for social change, the business of baking. And so, as I said, we've got a couple of cafe bakeries. You can kind of come and get a coffee and a cinnamon bun or brownie to go with your coffee. That's all made on site. And then we also sell celebration cakes, we make wedding cakes. And the business, kind of gives job opportunities for women that have kind of come through and graduated from our programs. So when they graduate from our program, they're given the opportunity for an apprenticeship in our bakery. There's apprenticeships in our cafe, there's work experience placements, and then there's other jobs as well. So kind of women that have come through have fulfilled lots of different jobs in our organisation, in the charity as well. And one of the other things actually that came out of, one of the perks that came out of lockdown, I think there's so many rubbish things that have come out of lockdown. One of the perks was we started lockdown brownies as well. So that's kind of part of our business, is sending brownies off all over the UK in the same way you might send a bunch of flowers. So that's the business side. The charity side, we run employability and independence programs, as I said, that teach women to bake. So that's where I come in. I get to teach them to bake every day of the week. And that's both the practical side of things. So how do you make a cake? How do you use an electronic scale? How do you make a loaf of bread? But also the stuff I get really excited about is the kind of theoretical side of things. So actually, why do we use these specific ingredients? How do they behave? What's going on when bread is proving? Why does pastry do that when it gets hot? It's all those kind of the why behind baking, as well as the actual making it itself. And then, yes, we teach them to bake over 6 months, and then they get another 18 months of support from Luminary after that. So that includes holistic one-to-one support. There's lots of other issues going on for these women. So it might be around housing, might be around universal credit or childcare. There's lots of different things that we can help them with. Training in the workplace, workplace skills, like building their confidence. Because I think, often when you've experienced, again, trauma or violence, it can really knock your confidence, and that's what's so important for getting back on your feet and into the working world. And then support kind of finding jobs, and we do mentoring as well. So I think quite a lot of women on this, or a few women on this call, probably will have been mentors for some of our women. So it's really nice to kind of tie that all in together.
Okay, thank you very much, Rachel. Let's go to Catherine Sloman now. Catherine, you set up the Kitchen Confidence Cookery School, and you also teach Bread Ahead, the bakery, their cooking school.
Yeah.
And you, I mean, the same question to you, but you were a criminal lawyer, is that right?
I was. So
And
I
that's
love
okay. There's food doing life-changing there.
Exactly. So I love the title of this talk. It's called Kitchen Confidence, which is the name of my cookery school, and it's about transforming lives through cooking. And as Sheila says, the first life that I transformed through cooking was mine, because as Sheila says, I was a criminal lawyer. And then we talked about this before, about how my career and a lot of women's careers kind of meander. So I meandered into communications and regulation and did various things. But in the background, well, I was a really fussy eater as a child, did not love food at all. But over the years as a student, and then a young working woman, I learned to cook because you have to learn to cook, was how I saw it. And then I started to think, actually, I quite enjoy this. And I took myself off to the Burton Bakery School in Bath for a week. I think that was probably 12 years ago. And then I went back to the Burton Bakery School, and I went back a few more times, and I went to other cookery schools, and I started teaching other people to cook. And I think it's really interesting what you said, Rach, about teaching people to use electronic scales. I think if you can cook and you love cooking, you kind of chop an onion. Well, I know what that means, but there are people who don't know where to start. And so that's one area of teaching that I really love, to really give people the basic skills to be able to read a recipe and to understand, what they need to do. And but to go back to me very briefly, I was then made redundant, which was very, very bruising, but actually very timely. It gave me time to think about how I could actually turn this informal career into an actual career. And at the same time as Kitchen Confidence was born, I also got a job at Bread Ahead Bakery teaching bakery. So I'm here with two hats, really. So Kitchen Confidence, my business, is really about teaching people home cooking and to get the skills to do that and to enjoy doing it. That's what I really love, seeing people change from seeing cooking as something that has to be done to being something they really love, whether that is baking a cake or baking a loaf of bread or making a meal. So that's what Kitchen Confidence Cookery School is all about. So we teach teenagers who are leaving home how not to go for a takeaway every night, or just to have beans on toast every night. Also teach younger children is, I find, particularly lovely because of the joy when you say to them, you've decorated your cake really beautifully, and to kind of instill that pleasure in young people is I really love. But I've also found that some of the people I've taught are people who've kind of had to do the same old thing, feed the 3 difficult children who all want to eat different things, who've kind of got stuck in a rut and are coming out the other side and just want to get back into loving cooking rather than seeing it as a chore. So that's what Kitchen Confidence is about, really. Learning how to cook nutritious food and to enjoy it. And Bread Ahead's slightly different in that that's for people who already know that they're interested in baking and want to learn more about baking. So we have various classes, but we also, back before everything was online, did school classes, and I really enjoyed those as well, because you'd get a group usually of people doing GCSE food and nutrition, about a third really interested, about a third it's a day out of school, and about a third really not that interested. But then they make a loaf of bread and they're so excited to take it home, or to make their pizza that they then, back then, went and sat by Southwark Cathedral and ate. So that's one of the things that I love about the Bread Ahead teaching, is it really does instill that pleasure in people. So that's what I do with my 2 hats. Now I've brought it down to just 2 hats, I think.
Well, pleasure. Yes, that seems particularly important now.
Yeah.
Let's go to Lucy. Lucy Vincent is the chief executive of Food Behind Bars, which is a fairly new charity. I mean, Lucy's been working on it for a while, but newly established charity that is focused on improving food actually in prisons. Lucy, I can't see you, but I think you must be.
I'm here.
Yes. Well, I mean, what do you make of, what we're addressing today, and tell us more about Food Behind Bars?
Yeah, I mean, reinvention through cooking and through food is, I guess, the core of our ethos. We're working in a slightly different environment, in quite a challenging environment. I started Food Behind Bars 4 years ago, actually. So we've been a charity for the last 6 months, which is a relatively new journey for us. But my journey with prison food has been a lot longer, actually. And yeah, talking about kind of career changes and things, I had no background in prisons. I'd never met anyone who'd been to prison. I'd never visited a prison myself over 4 years ago. But I came across a report in the news by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Prisons, and it was assessing prison food standards up and down the country. And I used to work in restaurants, and I love food and I love cooking, and something in the report just sparked a real interest in me. And the report kind of showed, I guess, the positive examples of prison food and the negative examples, and the conclusion was ultimately that with the negative examples of prison food, actually it's having a real impact on people's lives, and that lack of opportunity around good food and opportunities to cook, when it's not there, actually it's causing a whole kind of huge amount of issues. So I read the report, was very interested in it, and I was working as a journalist at the time, and I wrote an article about prison food, and a big part of the article was I researching and talking to people who've been in prison, and as I kind of gathered these stories of how prison food affected people, kind of emotionally and physically, and well beyond release as well, I built, I guess, a picture of prison food. And then I launched Food Behind Bars, as I say, 4 years ago. We originally launched as the UK's national campaign to improve prison food. I made a website overnight, wrote a couple more articles, and it kind of all went from there. And over the years, I've spent a lot of time in prisons up and down the country. I've worked in prison kitchens, in men's and women's establishments. I've continued to campaign around the issue and continue to write about it. And part of the reason why I set it up, actually, is because when I began researching about prison food, I actually felt as though it was really underrepresented, and quite unpopular, and certainly didn't receive the same kind of attention as school or hospital food had. And I think it was, I guess, a determination and an obligation. I felt like someone needed to represent this issue. And that's been really the driving force behind what we do ever since. And then 6 months ago, we set up as a charity. So I never intended for it to become an official organisation, but after spending a lot of time in prisons, I felt a real need and a real demand, actually, from the staff and also the prisoners, for an organisation that worked independently with prisons around the subject of food. And so what we do, and what we're kind of planning on doing this year, we work with prisons on a case-by-case basis. The reason we do that is that prisons are so different. I've worked in women's prisons, I've been into high security men's establishments, and the needs when it comes to food, and the needs of the population are very, very different. And so food is, it's different at every single one, and their kind of needs and requirements. So for instance, last year we launched a series of cooking competitions in prisons across the country. So we're about to launch our 3rd and 4th competition. We started them at HMP Brixton. And actually, they were really inspired by the fact that I'd met a lot of people in prison who were fantastic cooks, and they didn't have the opportunity to cook because they were in their cell. You know, they went up to the servery and got their food every single day that came from the prison kitchen. But actually I was meeting guys who'd worked in 5-star hotels and, you know, incredible cooking talent. And so we launched a cooking competition to kind of showcase that, and work with some amazing judges. And we always offer the prize of getting the top dish onto a restaurant menu in the public. So yeah, so reinvention through cooking, I think, is very key to what we do. I mean, I've written down hope, opportunity, and autonomy, and my 3 words, particularly is with prisons, is food provides hope. And so when it's done badly, you know, it can really have the opposite effect. And opportunity, you know, a lot of what we do is about creating opportunities in prison around food. And autonomy, I think, you know, like you said, learning how to cook and having that confidence has a huge impact on your kind of mental and physical well-being. So yeah, so that's what we do.
Okay, thank you both. I mean, thank you all 3 very much. Lucy, while you're, you know, the big person on my screen at the minute, let's begin with you. I mean, I think it's actually a question for all of you, and it's certainly a question for me. But how difficult has it been doing what you've each done, but you first, Lucy, in a society which still undervalues food? I mean, let's look at, you know, anything the government has done during this lockdown, that it's seen as unimportant, and cooking skills are seen as unimportant. I mean, look at the school curriculum. And so that, and food itself is seen either as trivial or as entertainment. I mean, you 3, and Lucy, I mean, you've taken on something, you know, in a very serious part of our society. How does that act? How does that bear on what you actually do?
It's a huge challenge, and particularly when I started, I mean, when I look back now, I kind of get the hostility, because I was a real outsider, whereas now, you know, we're a charity and we're a bit more established. But particularly at the beginning, I found a real disconnect between the people in prison who were telling me that food actually is the most important part of their day, and it can make or break it. And I guess the staff and the kind of the system as a whole, which undervalued food, and the bar was set relatively low. And I always kind of clarify that prison food varies massively across the board. So, you know, I've been in establishments that value food very highly, and they do an incredible job. And that often comes from one person or a couple of people who are kind of driving that forward, and has a really positive impact on the prison. But the kind of alternative view was, yeah, it was not regarded particularly highly. And then I felt like I was up against the view of a lot of the public as well, which is, like you say, in society, you know, we don't typically value food. Yeah, it can seem slightly trivial. I think then you transfer that to a prison environment where you've got huge problems, you know, every single day, massive challenges. And I think food comes even further down the list, because, you know, I've had people say to me in the past, you know, you can improve the food, but what about drugs? What about security? What about the overcrowding? What about all these issues that are in prison? Food's not going to help with that. And the only way I can describe it is prison is kind of like a wheel with all these spokes, and prison food is one of them, and it can't be disregarded because it does have an impact. But ultimately, all of the spokes have to be tackled, you know, to improve prison life. But yeah, so definitely challenging, and still is challenging. And part of the reason why we still campaign around the issue, and I still talk a lot about it and talk very openly and honestly about experiences in prison, is because I kind of want to change that perception a little bit. I really want to challenge it. And prison is a closed off part of the world as well. People don't really know what goes on. People have a lot of assumptions about what the food served there. So I'm constantly trying to challenge that. And I think having that conversation, I think helps in a way, but it will always be a challenge. I mean, over the years, you know, catering managers I've met have been relatively hostile because we're asking for quite a big improvement in something that in a lot of cases hasn't changed in years. So you're working against a system that's ingrained, I suppose.
God, Well, I'm sure there'll be more questions about that. I mean, I'd like to ask a few more, but Rachel, I mean, that big question of you working within a society that says food's trivial or it's entertainment. What's that done to what you do?
Yeah, I think actually from our perspective and from a kind of Luminary perspective, I haven't experienced a huge amount of pushback about it being trivial or about kind of, oh, it's just cake. I think actually the kind of training ground of it being just cake is a really brilliant training ground, because it's not life and death. It's not kind of so important that actually if you mess a cake up, if it's one of our ladies on our training course, they're making a cake and it goes wrong, it's not the end of the world. It can kind of take a knock on their confidence. But at the end of the day, it is just a cake. And so it's a really good way to build those transferable skills, to be able to take them either into a baking job or into another job. But kind of being able to, learn like time management or working with other people or how to manage conflict, or kind of the maths and the sciences. I think the little write-up for this talk said, like, when you're scaling up and down a recipe, you're using maths. When you're reading a recipe, you're using kind of English, and like the kind of science behind baking. It's all those transferable skills you can then apply to other things. I do think probably maybe, and different people at Luminary probably have different ideas about it, but I think one of the big pushbacks for us is more society's perception of the women that we work with, and the kind of ideas around them, like what value would they bring to a workplace, like are they really employable, what skills do they have to offer, and I think the kind of language around them as well as being kind of labelled, but also I think a lot of places and a lot of services can call them vulnerable women, and actually that is so far from our experience of them. Like, they are so strong, they're so resilient, they're really fighting for a better life for themselves and for their families, and so I think it's probably that's more the hostility or the pushback that we see, kind of in the day-to-day.
Have you been helped by the rising profile of bakers? You know, the Real Bread campaign, the way that, you know, that there are now these bakeries scattered all over Britain doing this quality stuff, and we know the more famous bakers. Has that helped?
I think absolutely. Actually, I think we've been really fortunate in the kind of timing that the time we've been placed in and the timing of when we set up. Actually, as we've grown, the profile of baking has also risen, and I think actually we've got quite a few like sister organisations that started around the same time as us, and we've all worked really closely together. And just kind of touching on what Lucy was saying, one of them works with women in a women's prison, and the funding that we receive is quite dramatically different, because baking can be quite kind of a sexy topic, whereas prison sometimes isn't, in the same way. So I think we probably have kind of been favoured in that sense.
Catherine, what about you? Does my question even make sense to you? I mean, there you are, you're a lawyer, your parents must have been your family must have been happy, and now you've gone into food, for God's sake.
I think my family is quite happy. They quite like the food that they get when they come here, when they're allowed again. It's quite interesting though, because I suppose the people I teach are self-selecting, either through Kitchen Confidence or through Bread Ahead. They've decided they want to go and learn how to make cinnamon buns, or they want to come to Kitchen Confidence to learn some dishes. So, but I think where it is interesting is the teenagers and young adults who are sometimes sent, not exactly under duress, but on sufferance, either with school or because their parents have decided that really having 3 dishes to be able to cook when they go off to university or live with their friends in their first flat. And so they sometimes, oh God, Mum says I've got to learn to cook. But I think once you get started and they can see that they're creating something, I don't particularly find that they are resistant. So once they get to me, they've already, they've kind of accepted the challenge and they're interested. So it's a little bit different for me, but it's quite interesting what you said, Lucy, because I used to take magistrates to visit prisons many years ago, and food always came up as an issue of one of the things that the prisoners were unhappy about. So I'm so glad that you're there doing something about it.
Thank you.
Rachel, what has lockdown taught you and taught Luminary?
Oh, a huge amount. I think like anyone, it's taught us a huge amount about actually what we're capable of when we're put under pressure, and when change comes our way, actually how adaptable we can be. I think I heard someone say the other day, and it was brilliant, that actually I think lockdown originally kind of made us aware of this like universal collective experience, and it was everyone was experiencing it all at the same time, but actually as it's gone on, we've learned that people are experiencing it, and their experience of it is very different and very unequal. And I think we've seen that with a lot of the women that we work with. Actually, their experience of lockdown is very different to someone else's. And yeah, and for things like kind of homeschooling, they've got like a single phone for a mother and a family of 3. If they're living in a hostel still, it's one room, and all of them have had to stay in that single room. And the kind of toll it's taken on their mental health as well has been huge. So yeah, I think we had to really challenge ourselves to come up with ways to still engage with them and still teach them and still support them in the best way we could, but not being able to meet in a physical space together. So a skill I learned was becoming a YouTube baker for a few months. I wouldn't say I would, interesting experience. I had to kind of teach all of our women through baking tutorials online. We had I think lockdown actually, it brought out, like specifically at the beginning, the real generosity of people was amazing. So we were like, through kind of individual and organisational donations, we're able to send baking equipment to all of the women that we were working with at the time, so they could all be baking from home, which was amazing. So yeah, I think it's been a challenge, but it's been kind of brought some good fruit out of it as well.
Catherine, the same question to you, really. What's it done to you? What's it done to your sense of the ability of, of your thoughts about food transforming lives?
Well, what I've learned is that actually you can teach people on Zoom. You can actually teach quite large groups of people. So particularly, well, with bread, particularly with you'll be saying, let's make Yule log now, and they'll say it's 5 o'clock in Mexico, 5 a.m. and you've got people from all around the world, so you can reach a lot more people, and it is doable, which I was a bit skeptical about at first, whether you could really, take a piece of dough and demonstrate to someone how this messy piece of dough becomes a loaf of bread a bit later, but it can be done. And so it was difficult at first, difficult to get used to teaching like that, but actually, as Rachel said, it's doable. There are other ways of doing that, and I actually like teaching on Zoom now. I didn't think I'd be saying that, and I think it'll carry on, because for some people that's the best way to do it. Yeah, as a customer.
Yeah, Lucy, I mean, the lockdown must have profoundly changed, your ability to go into prisons, to deal directly with staff and prisoners. But in spite of that, I mean, if you set up the charity officially 6 months ago, it didn't stop you in your tracks.
Yeah, I think people were like, you started a charity in 2020? It's like, what are you doing? Up against a very difficult funding landscape and huge issues, actually. But I actually read a statistic the other day. I think last year had the highest number of people establishing charities and social enterprises. So even though, on the outside, perhaps not a great year to start a charity, for us, it was our biggest year of growth. And this kind of increased empathy from the public that I think was unique to the year, basically. And what that meant for us is we started as a charity, and we were kind of running these competitions remotely in prisons. So You know, the judging panel were judging via Zoom, and I had a prison officer taking pictures in the kitchen of all the dishes and sending them to me. So we found a way around it. But for me, yeah, the kind of the heartwarming side of it has been, yeah, huge public support and great donations and things that, you know, I never imagined in the first few months of running a charity we would have. I think on the flip side, I certainly felt as though our work was more needed than ever. And I guess one reason why is prisons during this lockdown have been hugely affected. So since March, they've been on kind of relative lockdown, which for most establishments have meant people are spending up to 23 hours in their cell. No work or education. So the only people working in prison at the moment are actually in the kitchens and key workers, kind of like on the outside. And what that has led to is actually a real crisis in well-being. And from a charity perspective, the demand that I'm now getting from prisons is that once this is over and we can kind of get back in terms of access, the need is far greater than it was before. So, you know, I feel good about the fact that we kind of took last year and took the time to set up as an organisation, because I think we're going to come out of this, particularly in prisons, but also in society, of really needing positive initiatives around food and cooking, and those opportunities are going to need to be created. And yeah, particularly from prison staff at the moment, the demand is very much there. So yeah, been massive learning lessons. I think for me as well, the biggest thing I've personally had is, you know, the pleasure of cooking is just the thing that's kind of got me through. And I was speaking to a prisoner the other day who's doing loads of cooking in his cell, and I said, why do you do it? And he was like, well, it's the pleasure. You know, it's almost not even about, you know, eating better or the prison food's rubbish. It's actually about the pleasure of cooking and eating. And I think we've all realised that. I certainly have. Yeah.
It's interesting. All three of you have talked about pleasure, and you know that does seem to be seeping into the culture now. I mean, you know, plenty of people in this audience have been saying this for a long time, but you're not going to change the state of food, the state of our health, the state of involvement in cooking without that pleasure principle, are we? I mean, without that, it's hopeless. I mean, we've had far too much of the less fat, less sugar, less, you know, finger wagging, Catherine.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Moderation in all things, but enjoy it. Yeah. So one of the things, and there are a couple of people here who are involved in this, cook-alongs, the Zoom cook-alongs that I've been doing with people during this lockdown period have been just such good fun, and people have cooked things they wouldn't normally cook and taught each other cooking. So that's another benefit. I'd much rather see my friends in real life, obviously, but cooking along in other ways has been really another way of finding pleasure through food in this weird time.
We're with quite a lot of questions. We can go back to, if we run out of questions, we can, you know, go back to talking together. But there's a question here from Therese Wilmot, and she says, Hugh Fernley-Whittingstall says that the people who have the best chance of survival in a pandemic are those who can cook. Do you agree? And she wants to find opportunities to teach cookery skills locally, but doesn't know where to start looking, and you know, would like suggestions. But what do you think of what Hugh said? I mean, what do you think? Catherine, what do you think?
So what did Hugh say? I just missed
Hugh said people who have the best chance of survival in a pandemic, I mean, that's a rather strong word, are those who can cook. You know, do you agree?
I agree with you that survival is a bit of a strong word for it, but yeah, if you have less choice of ingredients or less opportunities to go and get your ingredients, knowing what to do with them, you've got far greater options. So yeah, I think survival is a bit strong, but
well, except, you know, what we know, you know, the new science of the microbiome, you know, our guts and how that needs, you know, raw, you know,
yeah,
lots of a variety of food, and how disastrous it is if you eat highly processed food and lots of sugar. And so, you know, your immune system is not going to be in a great state I mean, if you can't cook and you don't have much money, you're eating mostly
That's nutritiously, yeah.
not very good food. I don't know. Rachel, what would you say about that?
Yeah, I think I'd totally agree. I think if we kind of cast our minds back to when the supermarket shelves were like completely bare, actually, if you had the kind of the skills to be able to take random raw stuff and put it together into a meal, you were the one that was going to have the best meal that night. But I think possibly to kind of add another level as well on a kind of mental health note and a kind of general well-being. We've all been looking for ways to kind of keep our heads okay when our kind of normal things have been taken away from us. And I think it's Mind have like their 5 top tips to well-being, and one of them is learning a new skill or learning something new, whether that's like a fact or a recipe or something. So I think, yeah, and kind of if you've been given some of the skills and you can then build on them, and you've got kind of the raw skills to be able to build on them, then you can kind of embrace new recipes or new techniques or learn to make something you've never made before, and that is always going to have a really positive impact on your mental health as well, and your kind of well-being, and staying maybe a little bit happier in lockdown.
Lucy?
Yeah, I agree. I was going to say mental health, and I think it's interesting in the food landscape at the moment is, there's been a bit of a shift from we all know the physical benefits of eating well. They really have been we have been educated over the last few decades, but actually what's kind of surfacing now is the mental health benefits of cooking and eating well. And certainly something in prisons, it goes without saying that I want food to be healthier, but actually, when you kind of go in there talking about nutrients and whatever, particularly for a lot of guys in prison, they don't find it very engaging. But when you go in and say, we're going to make a delicious burger and it's going to taste, and it's about the balance, I think, and treating yourself and in moderation, learning how to cook and having the confidence, I think is key, because so many people still can't cook and haven't had that experience or that learning. So yeah, I do agree with you, although survival is a little bit strong.
I think
if you look at the people who are most vulnerable to COVID, and then the people who, when they get it, are most likely to die, it all has links back to what you eat. And well, I mean, it also has links back to injustice and unfairness and inequality too, but food is part of that. A question here, there are quite a lot of business questions. I'm a home baker, says Sarah King, and we're registered as a food business with the local council. We have a visit from the AHO and get a rating. Then we have, insurance, public liability, and are able to tell to customers. And that she says, one of the virtues is that bread is considered a low risk food due to its stability and high cooking temperature. I mean, I suppose what this question is is it easy to set yourself up as a, moving from a home baker to someone who does it publicly? I don't know who's best to answer this. Catherine, I guess.
Well, there are those hoops to go through, which is the environmental health and making sure you've got the health and safety qualifications that you need, but though they're all eminently doable things and lots of people do it. I'm part of a group called the Bread Angels, who are either teachers or micro bakers. So if you're interested in that, check the Bread Angels website, because that will give you more information, I think, about how to set up. So that's the quite nice thing about teaching. Especially when you're doing it online, because
I once had a visit from a bread angel. I think the person probably set up for recording for the program, but she did give me a lesson. That was absolutely marvelous. I assume the two of you, probably Rachel and Lucy, might not have any answer to that, although Elizabeth Luard has said the queen of everything. I can't imagine, Elizabeth, that you really need. This is a question for Rachel. She says, I buy my sourdough from a local home baker. Do any of your women home bake? And if so, how do home bakers deal with health and safety issues?
Yeah, so we do. We actually 13 of our graduates have set up their own businesses, which is really exciting and very encouraging. And quite a few of them are little kind of micro bakeries in their homes. And yeah, as I think as kind of Catherine said, they need to be set up with their like food health and safety certificate, and they need to have a kind of visit from the council as well to check that everything is like as it should be. And a lot of the time it comes down to documentation as well, as like working in any professional kitchen, kind of the same documentation is expected, really just to make sure that what you're selling is safe for people to eat. So yeah, I think that's probably, yeah, I think the transition from being a home baker to being a professional baker is it can be quite a big jump actually, and can be underestimated. The skills that are required can be quite different. And yeah, so I think that's kind of where we come in, is trying to teach people to be professional bakers rather than just being able to make like a sponge cake in their home. How do they scale that up and make 30 at once? That sort of stuff.
I've recently come to see how you might be forced to scale up, because I was given 2 sourdough starters by 2 different people, randomly. And now I feel like, what am I going to do with my life? I mean, it's driving everything out of the fridge and driving everything out of the kitchen. And it's just like, what am I going to do with all this? I can't eat, I can't get fatter, lockdown fat. Anyway,
well, there's a question here to all of you from Angus Towler. He says, what do you hope to achieve next? Do you all have a master plan, or do you operate more on instinct? Whew, that's a big question, isn't it? Anyone want to take that one up?
Yeah, I don't mind.
Yeah, Sluicy, yeah.
I'm very instinctive, which sometimes is good, but sometimes is, I'm trying to be a little bit more strategic. Yeah, we kind of, this is quite a big year for us. So I'm hoping that things will kind of quieten down soon. But our big plan this year is we've kind of got a big pilot project launching with a prison in the UK, which we've just got funding for. And yeah, it's kind of on that case-by-case basis. So we've established a relationship with a prison, and we've kind of established their needs, and they want some help in improving the food served, and they want to kind of offer more opportunities for the men around food. So we're hoping this year in early summer to firstly kind of work with them on the menu. So a lot of catering managers who run kitchens, and in prisons, the way the kitchens run is you have a catering manager and the workforce is made up of the prisoners. So sometimes it's fantastic, it's real kind of meaningful opportunities, teaching guys how to cook. But in most cases, the opportunity is not being fully kind of relished. So we want to work with the kitchen to kind of, provide opportunities around learning how to cook, change the menu. And then this particular prison also have a couple of empty greenhouses on the prison land. So we are hopefully going to transform them into a kitchen garden. It's quite a big part of the project. So yeah, kind of the whole food cycle really. So learning how to grow food, harvest the food, and that's going to go to the prison kitchen to kind of supplement what's being served basically. So that's our big plan this year, alongside all these cooking competitions, which are lots of fun.
Sounds fantastic.
About what Angus said, what do you hope to achieve next? What's next?
Is that for me?
No, that was for Catherine.
Oh, okay, good. Sorry.
What's next for me? It's actually, I think, for both Bread Ahead and Kitchen Confidence, it's about building what I've learned about how you can reach more people, and by this online world that's been thrust upon us, but how you can reach more people, teach more people to cook. So for Kitchen Confidence, it's kind of thinking of ways to reach more disadvantaged people. I was looking back at my old emails. I was all set to start giving cookery lessons to the members of the choir with no name, which you may or may not have heard of. And the last email fixing a date was the 10th of March last year. So for me, finding ways to reach a wider audience for what I do.
Rachel?
Yeah, I think COVID kind of threw us off our track really. We had big dreams for this year that have all been sidelined a little bit. But we started our first cohort in our new training space last year, and they were able to finish their last month in kind of September, October time. But the next kind of this year is kind of starting our second one, hopefully, due to start in April, but we will see. And yeah, Catherine's going to come and teach actually on one of those days, which is really fun. Nice.
Very excited about coming to teach at Luminary. Yes, whenever it happens.
It'll be really good. And then kind of bigger dreams. We want to open another site in London, and kind of further down the line to have other sites in the UK. I think there's a lot of need, and there's probably always going to be more need than we're able to kind of fulfill. But yeah, that's kind of the big dreams for us.
There's a question here from B. Savory, who actually was on the food program but last, who says, thank you very much for an interesting talk. I would be interested to know whether you feel that engagement in food is still quite gendered. Do you feel that women are more likely to engage with your kind of outreach? Rachel, I mean, you're absolutely dealing with women all the time, but can you imagine that, you could do this with men who'd suffered many of the same problems?
Yeah, I think there are examples of organisations doing exactly that, and Luminary was set up so that we only work with women because of the kind of gender violence aspect that a lot of them have experienced. Actually, we needed to create a really safe place for them, where they kind of didn't feel at threat. So that's kind of us. But there's so many other organisations that do work with both genders and with men as specifically. An example, Dusty Knuckle, they work with kind of young men at risk of being in gangs. There's Providence Row, which work with both genders. There's a few in kind of all over the country. There's a couple in Scotland, and actually I think the quite physical nature of bread baking, and the kind of image of what a baker looks like, historically does actually attract quite a lot of men. So yeah, I think it would have to have a different emphasis on things, and it would probably be a slightly different experience. But I do think baking is kind of goes across both men and women and everyone else in between.
Lucy, I mean, you have talked, there's another question here about directly to you about the men and guys, but you have you work with both men and women, both men and women's prisons. Do you think, that it's still an engagement with food is still about mostly attractive to women, and, are we changing women's lives more than men's?
Yeah, I guess in the prison estate, it's slightly different, kind of talking from experience. And I have worked with a women's prison. I spent 3 weeks working in the kitchen of a women's prison. And I guess what I identified there of being around the women is their experiences of food and what they wanted to get out of food and cooking was slightly different to the men that I'd met in prison. So often with the women, it was very much based around family. The majority were mothers. So it was more kind of, I would say a lot of them already had slightly more cooking skill and experience than the men. And that's a massive kind of overstatement, but a lot of the women I'd met had already had quite a lot of experience of home cooking. But, certainly interested from another perspective. A lot of the guys in prison are, there is an interest in terms of family and things like that. I think as well that the main thing for us with the two genders, particularly in prison, is hugely different needs in terms of diet and food and cooking, which is that food in prison tends to affect women in a slightly different way, much more of an emotional impact. And also women's prisons have quite a high rate of obesity, whereas men tend to go into prison, eat their food, go to the gym, and actually men tend to lose weight. It's really unfair, but I often say that that you kind of find the difference between the two. But yeah, certainly we work with the whole kind of prison estate. It's hard because I think 85% of prisons in the UK are men's prisons. So kind of by default, you know, we have a huge interest for men's prisons, and there are fewer women's prisons in the country. But certainly it's still the same need, just a slightly different angle, I would say.
Catherine, do you see it, you know, in most of the people you deal with are female?
Yeah, I would say so. So, but it's interesting. So in the bakeries, it does tend to be men who are the bakers. But in terms of classes, yes, I would say we're getting more. I'm getting more men coming now, but it's certainly more of a learning how to cook is still, I think, seen as to a large extent a women's thing, and I'm working on that, encouraging more men to come along.
There was another question for you here, Catherine, that said 2 out of 5 teenage children are vegetarian. Is that something that you're coming across when you're teaching your teenagers?
Yeah, but I was vegetarian for a long time, and I think it's quite easy to adapt to teach people to cook the diet they're interested in cooking. So we've done some vegan recipes this month for Veganuary. So I think for me, it's about teaching the skills. It doesn't really matter whether it's a vegetarian meal or a vegan meal. It's the skills that's important, I think.
There's a question for Lucy, which is just a technical, really. I mean, what connection have you had, if any, with Clink? You know, which was the 15 years ago, you know, did something quite revolutionary in terms of training at first just entirely male prisoners to be high-level cooks, and then set up the restaurants.
Yeah. So I've been to the Clink. I mean, I've been as a guest, and I've also been as I've visited a couple of Clink restaurants whilst in prison. So the main one was Brixton. Obviously, they have a great Clink restaurant there, which provides, you know, fantastic opportunities for the men who are part of the course, really, and you know, and actually very life-changing, you know, in terms of just the standard of food that you're cooking. You know, coming out of your cell and going to the Clink every day and making incredible, you know, fine dining food, and you can tell, I think, when you look at the Clink's reoffending rates, people who've been on the course, you know, it's you know, incredible success rate. I think, you know, there's so many fantastic examples of initiatives in prison around cooking, and I guess what we're doing, which is slightly different, is you know, I get frustrated in prison where these fantastic initiatives, and then someone's still coming back to their cell at the end of the day and eating the same food or going hungry. Or so we're kind of ambitiously trying to tackle both. You know, we're trying to provide opportunities around cooking, but ultimately we're trying to change the actual food on the menu, really, because you know, how great would it be if both those things are available, I think.
There's a question from Joe Fuller to everyone. What are the best ways of supporting getting involved with food social enterprises? Rachel, what would you say?
I think first and foremost, it's like supporting any other business. Like buy stuff from them, support them kind of with your money, and because I think there is a lot of the time there's an added pressure, unlike being kind of like a small food business, which, I mean, this year has been a nightmare for pretty much all of them. Actually, it's kind of the added pressure of also having the kind of charity side, and you're kind of juggling both the whole time. So I know, like, any kind of brownie orders that come our way, like, that goes into the work that we do, and that's a really tangible way of supporting us, or kind of other social enterprises as well. I think also, like, offering your skills. A lot of the time they're small startups, and they either are built on kind of like it's usually built on kind of seeing a need, and trying to use kind of a business to kind of fill that need. And so people aren't necessarily business people, or they're not necessarily chefs, or they're not kind of necessarily marketeers, but actually if you've got those skills and you can see a place where they would be useful, I think reaching out and offering your skills as well.
Catherine, what about you? How would you answer that?
think Rachel's probably said everything that I would have said. Yeah, if they're selling something, buy it. But yeah, I think a lot of us have learned new skills in lockdown, and sharing those skills, sharing the skills we had before, but also sharing new skills. I've learned new ways of doing things. So offer that of advice or support. You've probably got something to offer them that they'd appreciate.
Jackie, I don't know if you have another question that you would from the list.
I think we've covered most things. There is something that our own Fiona Richmond, who is a member of LG London, and she is flagging up the fact that there is a wonderful social enterprise in Scotland that is transforming the lives of women who've touched the criminal justice system through making chocolate. So I think, I could get involved with that.
Yeah.
Let's taste it.
We also have a question that was sent before the meeting, which was from Sarah Morton. And she says, I've volunteered running cookery courses with food banks and cooked for various charity meals. I'm now studying at level 3 in professional cookery and would love one day to have my own cafe that offers training to people in my local community. Do any of you have any advice for Sarah? I mean, there you are, there you are, Catherine. You said you've meandered, and all of you have just taken hold of your lives and made careers, got fascinating jobs through food. What would you say was the essence of advice you'd give to Sarah?
I think a bit of fearlessness has helped me along the way. I think if I spent a lot of time worrying about whether A, I can change prison food, or B, I should be, then I probably wouldn't have done it. So definitely just do it, I would say. And also meeting people, I think, there's sometimes people that I've met quite early on who, later on, since we've set up as a charity, have become really integral. So always having those conversations with people who kind of back what you're doing, I suppose, is key, because you don't know where that relationship might lead.
Meet interesting people leads on to doing interesting things. Rachel and Catherine, would you say the same?
Yeah, I think talk to lots of people, pick other people's brains. But it sounds like you're already on the right track. You've started heading in the right direction. Talk to other people, find out how they've done it, what they do differently.
Yeah, I'd similarly echo that, and probably add, start small. If you're maybe that's opposite to the fearlessness, but actually just take on one person and employ one person that maybe wouldn't be given the opportunity, and start with that and then build from there, rather than kind of throwing yourself into a massive thing. Because I think we've done a huge amount of learning in the 6 years that we've been going. We're still making changes now to kind of how we do things and what's best practice. So yeah, I'd say kind of start small and go and visit other places that are doing similar things to what you want to do, and learn from them. Kind of take inspiration from other places and chat to them and see if they'd be able to give you advice as well.
Well, this has been completely marvelous, and never have I needed optimism more. And these 3 women just make me feel optimistic about a world where women are operating and becoming more important in the way things are run, the way things are. So thank you all very much. I mean, it was marvelous, and thank you for the ladies for organizing this meeting, this Zoom discovery. And that's sort of it, really. Jackie, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sheila, once again. Thank you, ladies. Really inspiring stuff. And thank you to all those people who've taken the time to join us today. And there's been some lovely exchange of ideas in the chat. So it's been really fabulous. I'm very grateful to you for sharing everything today.
Thank you Sheila as well.
I wish you all good luck and carry on being fearless and operating on a small scale to begin with and trusting yourself and getting help from others. Anyway, goodbye. Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so